us. We're glad to have the distinguished guests of Dustin Sulak and Dr. Ethan Russo here with us. I was very pleasantly surprised that they accepted my invitation, and I'm sure you'll learn a lot from them, and they're more than willing to impose their knowledge onto you. And feel free to ask questions. We have little question cards that you can fill out, and we'll do a question and answer at the end of the night. But first, let me have the pleasure to introduce you Aniki Brown, who's a country manager and legal counsel for Generali Worldwide Insurance. She'll come and do a speech right now. Thanks. Could you please welcome her on stage? Thanks.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, a warm welcome to you, to your curiosity, and to your open minds. My name is Aniki Brown, and I am the country manager of Generali Worldwide Insurance Company at International Healthcare Solutions. I've been part of this team for almost a decade. I've been with them for 9 years, first as their attorney, setting up the local agency. And for the past 7 years, I've been serving as the country manager, responsible for all local operations. Over the past almost decade, I've learned a thing or two about the medical ecosystem, as I like to call it, the healthcare ecosystem, and its reaction to change. My team has had to change, starting with just 2 of us in a small back office. We have grown to become a team of 10 strong, all from Caymanian families. We have sunk deep roots and trained many young people who have come in and out of our employment to serve people of our country with care and intention, focusing on our people first. As a cohesive team, we have worked tirelessly to shift and change with the times and the evolving needs of those who we serve. Even now, in answer to the calls from the people of the Cayman Islands, we are now partnering to review our products, our services, technology, and coverage to meet the needs of small and medium businesses in our community with accessible and affordable coverage that you can trust. Change is a part of being human, and it applies just as much to the human body and human health. Which brings me to why we're here today. We as a country are poised to make some historic decisions about our future. We have already begun the national discussion on the use of cannabis oil, and we have some ways to go before we have determined our complete path. My team and I are here to do our part to open the dialogue and to support you, fellow members of our community, in making informed decisions about what happens next for our country. Allow me to paint a picture for you of the medical and healthcare ecosystem. I'm going to focus on where we're coming from and where we find ourselves today. And other presenters are likely to focus on the steps that we're now taking to face the future. So at the dawn of mankind, whether you believe we fell from the sky, we were created, evolved, whatever it is that you believe was the source of mankind, we can all agree that the healthcare ecosystem began with the human body. We were born, we ate, we grew. Those of us who survived long enough to mate created the next generation of human beings. We passed on knowledge, we experienced pain. Some of us suffered, and then each generation died, passing on to the next. Then came the healers. Some members of mankind became spiritual leaders, priests, shamans, knowledgeable in the healing properties of plants and nature's other gifts. As we grew to know ourselves, our bodies, and our world better, knowledge was handed down to younger generations in various parts of the world, giving rise to, and I'm going to go back just a little, the studies of Ayurveda in India, Chinese medical practices, priests of Imhotep in Egypt, the pre-Mayan and Incan peoples of South America, and the scholars of Timbuktu. We had a vast body of knowledge, a mix of spirit and of science, growing like a garden in every part of the world to explain and to alleviate pain and suffering and to do as much as possible to delay death. Then came modern Western medicine as we know it today. The journey began in about 420 BC, 420 being a pretty significant number connected to this topic, with Hippocrates, who determined that diseases had a natural as opposed to supernatural cause, taking the guiding hand of medicine out of the temple and into the hand of scientists. Now, many of us still have a connection to the spirit as we relate to our health and our experience of our bodies. However, we're going to focus on modern medicine, Western medicine, for a moment. In the centuries that followed, the Greeks, the Romans, and much of the Islamic world studied and documented their findings, learning more about the human body and its interaction with the world and its environment. In 400 AD, the first hospital in Latin Christendom was founded, and then 650 years later, about 650 years later, England obtained her first hospital. So studies would have snowballed and picked up momentum in the 1800s with discoveries such as anesthesia and vaccination. And then our medical knowledge skyrocketed in the 1900s with groundbreaking discoveries almost every year as blood type, penicillin, CPR, insulin, and other things were discovered and developed. And every year, we've learned more about preventing and alleviating pain and suffering. And every year, we find new ways to live longer. So technology and pharmaceuticals, modern surgery, and other medical practices as they exist today would completely astonish the early healers, such as Imhotep, Hippocrates, and all of the others throughout all of the other parts of the world. Enter the government. So as we grew to know more about how to heal, we also learned a lot about how to harm. Bodies that govern peoples, and I mean government bodies, are still very hard-pressed to protect the public and to create and regulate standards of medical practice. Government regulation continues to develop to protect the unsuspecting human body from exploitation by those who are more hungry for knowledge and profit than for healing. Many of us already know that medicine has had very, very dark and brutal days where knowledge and profit became the higher priority than well-being. Body snatching, kidnapping, involuntary human experiment, just to name a few of the evils that mankind has had to endure, created a need for limits and boundaries, defined ethics and standards, and the protection of law. The harms of drug use and abuse have attracted their fair share of this regulation. Prohibition has been one form of regulation that governments have employed from as early as 1884, when Egypt first banned cannabis. Other substances also fell under strict control or outright prohibition throughout the world, including alcohol, funny enough, opium, morphine, cocaine, and heroin. There's an entire period of American history referred to as the Prohibition, when alcohol became a banned substance in the United States. And I was actually just learning from one of the persons in the audience earlier on that came and did quite well during the Prohibition and the illegal trade of alcohol. Interesting pieces of our semi-pirate history. But the original intention of Prohibition has also had cause to be questioned at times. There's certain historical commentators who have concluded that drug prohibition has been used to subjugate and oppress minorities throughout the world. The most striking historical and most direct historical example that we can see that has been given by such commentators has been the United States using the prohibition of opium to control the immigrant Chinese population that was causing some significant disruption in the West Coast economy of the United States following the gold rush. The effectiveness of prohibition has also been questioned in recent years. Most notable of this questioning is the Global Commission on Drug Policy's 2016 report, entitled Advancing Drug Policy Reform, a New Approach to Decriminalization. World leaders such as Kofi Annan, Ruth Dreyfus, and Richard Branson signed their name to this report, denouncing criminalization of drugs as a whole, as a threat to human rights and the rule of law and public health. They, in fact, point to criminalization as a cause for public health crises. As the delicate dance of setting the right boundary for the times has continued by governments and communities such as ours throughout the world, another player has entered this ecosystem: the insurance industry. While medical technology and pharmaceutical study advanced, money poured into research and development of medical practice. As a result, healthcare has become increasingly expensive, and you've probably heard a lot about the discussion of the Obamacare changes in the United States. We ourselves have had several changes throughout the last 10, 15 years throughout our own healthcare system to combat or to somehow manage the expense of healthcare. The average person cannot afford healthcare without assistance. So the human desire to avoid pain and suffering is endless. We have a bottomless demand. It does not ever go away. And as soon as new knowledge emerges, it immediately walks into this waiting demand. Governments the world over are finding themselves managing a tension between this bottomless need and their limited resources to meet this demand. So the health insurance industry has developed as a possible answer to this tension. We support the private consumer in certain systems of the world, but definitely in the Cayman Islands, we will support the private consumer or the consumer's employee group who cannot otherwise access healthcare, this expensive product that it has become, by managing and pooling resources, we call them premiums, in order for us to pay your medical practitioners, pay claims. As new medical treatments enter this medical ecosystem, this healthcare ecosystem, governments determine whether they should make them available to the public and on what terms. The change that Cayman has just brought into law as it relates to cannabis oil is no different. A proposal was made, heavily investigated, deliberated, and debated, and then determined that it should be made into law. Health insurers such as Generali Worldwide Insurance Company pay claims on behalf of our clients for legal and approved treatments. Like other responsible citizens of this country, we consider ourselves a corporate citizen. We at Generali Insurance continue to commit ourselves to obeying the laws of the Cayman Islands and to support the open dialogue about the things that are happening in this ever-shifting, changing landscape of the healthcare ecosystem that may support changes in law to better serve our community. I hope that you take away from everything that I've said this evening a better understanding of the framework in which the following discussions are about to take place. I would have served my purpose in this discussion if you now have questions to ask and are in a position to better inform yourselves in making up your own minds on what to think about this subject. Our aim is to support the public in the Cayman Islands in educating ourselves and determining the most responsible course of action that we as a community should take in future. This topic will affect all of us. At some point in time, as we are born, we eat and grow, have children, pass on knowledge, experience pain sometimes, and then someday die. I'll close tonight with a little story about my first encounter with marijuana. Don't get too excited, it's not really that exciting, okay? You know how in the Caribbean, we have uncles and aunts that aren't actually blood relatives to us? Anybody know about that? Well, I have one such uncle who owned a hotel in Jamaica, right across the street from the police station. So when I was a young girl on a visit to see this particular uncle, one of my favorites, he pointed to a plant that had clearly sprung up on welcome in the middle of the landscaping in the front door of his hotel. Look at this bright and feisty ganja plant just spring up in front of the police station, so. He found it hilarious and told his gardeners not to touch it. So everything around it was well manicured, but you could see this thing was just growing on its own, doing its own thing. Fast forward many years now. And I'm afraid there's a sad turn to this story. But this same uncle has received some very grave news in the last couple of years. He has been diagnosed with cancer. Today, he's being treated by a medication developed out of the very same bright and faced plant that popped up, had the audacity to just be growing wild in front of the police station in his front yard all along. It was just close enough. The care that he's now receiving is just close enough to what his Rasta man around the corner would have recommended anyway. So this is what we call change. So ladies and gentlemen, I hope that we all learned something constructive this evening, and I wish you a pleasant and informative night. Take care.
All right, thank you, Annika. And I'd like to say a great appreciation on my part for Generali for coming on, Generali Worldwide Insurance for coming on. They actually called me up last minute and an offer to be a sponsor, and that's one of the reasons this is all possible through sponsorship. So I applaud them, and I applaud them for being one of the companies that's willing to go out and be in the front and the forefront of this interesting and evolving discussion. I'd like to welcome to stay on the stage Denny Warren, as I like to call him, Cayman's own, and as he likes to be called, Georgetown's West own. I like to, everyone knows that Denny is his personal situation, and he was bold enough to go out in front of the public and the press and push when no one else was willing to bring this agenda forward. And I sincerely appreciate the efforts that he has put in. So I'd like to welcome him on stage, and I'd like everyone to give a warm welcome.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How much hours do I have, Prentice? 15 minutes. All right. I just want to briefly talk about the experience and the reason why you want to consider this before you find yourself in a situation like my family finds itself. Because when you hear the words, I'm sorry to tell you that you have cancer, everything around you, even things that are still, starts traveling at 100 miles an hour past you. And vision gets very blurry, thoughts get very cloudy, and it gets very hard to make good, solid decisions in the midst of such chaos. You feel a grip of fear to a degree that's hard to express. In May 2015, I was at home, and my wife called me and said, I need you to come to the hospital. And when she said that, I knew what I was going to hear. And so I took a few minutes, and I cried to an extent that's unbelievable. And then I tried to dry my tears, and I went to the hospital, and I told myself I'm not going to cry anymore. And I didn't. The doctor asked us if we would like to have a second opinion. And we said, sure. And we got directed to Health City, where we met with Dr. Venetia Benoit, and she was awesome. Things that the scan didn't clearly reveal, but that she suspected might be the case, all turned out to be absolutely correct. That was extremely beneficial because it helped us to have some time to think about what we might say, what we might do, who we might call to ask for advice. It was a challenging time, and it only gets harder. And I felt a degree of despair that I don't know how to express. But instead of letting that fear paralyze us, we asked ourselves, what could we possibly do other than the conventional medicine, which, if she took it, the probability was that she still wouldn't live. We later came to understand how low the probability of her survival is, and today she still is in that danger zone because she's on a pharmaceutical inhibitor that is just really buying time. And the oncologist didn't originally recommend chemotherapy because she thought that wasn't the best course of action at the time given the risks that were involved. And I kind of think what was happening is that the oncologist was basically saying that she would leave that harsh treatment for the last, and my wife could decide whether she wanted to take it or not. And so we started looking for an alternative. And I promise you, the last place I thought I would be today is up here talking about cannabis. I didn't go looking for cannabis. I went looking for something, anything. So I turned to a trusted friend, Google, and I asked the question, cannabis cure, enter. And after I don't know how many hundreds of pages I've sifted through, I came upon a video of a lady in Australia her circumstances are very similar to my wife's. Same gene mutation, same cancer. And she made mention of cannabis oil. And I started researching it. And it took me down a road that brought us to where we are today. The challenge of getting to this point is extremely challenging. It took me about a year of essentially full-time trying to make cannabis legal. And I know with absolute certainty that the reason it was possible was because when we explained to the public the situation, the public supported it. And the public made that support known to our representatives. And I believe that that's the reason why it happened as quickly as it did. And I would like to express a heartfelt thank you to each and every one of you who took the time to make a difference to whatever extent it was you did. I appreciate your efforts. And I believe that we have taken a step in a direction that is important to change the way we think about health. I know it was true for me. As a result of my wife's diagnosis, I went as far as being vegan. By the way, Dustin, I have to ask you a question about that afterwards. But tonight, the fact that we are here with a law passed as of November 18th, 2016, that allows for a medical doctor who is registered in the Cayman Islands to prescribe cannabis oil, and for a pharmacy that's registered in the Cayman Islands to dispense that cannabis oil. While I thought it was possible, I actually thought the fight would be a lot harder. It wasn't until we went out and started talking that I realized that it wouldn't be as difficult as I thought. And what I've learned subsequent to doing this is I've come to understand that a lot of the stuff that was fed to us by the mainstream media is propaganda. And it's for political and economic reasons and have absolutely nothing to do with health. I've come to understand that health care is not pharmaceutical drugs. Health care is food, and it's the preventative steps that you take to be in the best possible health as possible. I'm not saying that I rule out pharmaceutical drugs. They have their place. But we shouldn't think that we can live our lives as recklessly as possible and then fall back on a pharmaceutical drug. Because the pain that you suffer, I assure you, isn't worth it to have that kind of mentality. And it might not work. You might die anyhow. So I would like to encourage each one of us to be as healthy as possible, to be involved, to pay attention to what is being said about healthcare, to let your voice be known to our policy makers. Because I believe that it was nothing short of your health that made it possible. There were some fierce adversaries. Some was in the government. One was the chief officer for health, Ms. Jennifer Ahern. I wish that she had taken a different view of the situation, because what it has actually done is has delayed my wife getting access and others getting access to cannabis oil. And there's a famous saying that Health City normally says whenever they're on the radio talking about heart attacks. They say time is muscle, and delay causes death. And we should do everything that we possibly can to accelerate this process. Because since May 2015, today my wife still doesn't have access to the oil. We're almost there. We're not losing hope, and we continue to push forward. We're making progress. It's slow, but delay would have, if the delay had not occurred, we probably would have been there by now. And who knows what difference that could have made, not just in my wife's life, but in the lives of other people. And so I'd like to encourage the public to think about another step that we need to make regarding cannabis. And that is that we actually need to grow it here. Importing it is one thing. But what I have come to understand through personal experience is that you lose a lot of control. You lose control over what you can actually purchase because you're limited by the restrictions of the laws and the jurisdiction from which you will source it. You lose some control because you lose availability. And you're limited in that regard. You're sort of in the dark to some extent about the quality of the extract that you're importing. And so, in my view, it would be much better if we were to modify our laws some more to allow for it to be grown here, for allow the testing to take place with an independent body that is credible, and so that we could more closely monitor the quality of the product and the availability of the product. And I dare say, given what I've seen with other countries, we perhaps could be exporters of cannabis instead of importers of cannabis. And that brings us back to economics. But economics that could be beneficial for us instead of us exporting our dollars to purchase the oil. There are so many people who have contacted me and shared stories with me that sometimes it's just amazing. I truly couldn't be a doctor. I just can't imagine how difficult it must be to hear heart-wrenching story after heart-wrenching story every single day as a physician. And sometimes it's frustrating when I think about the challenges that we have in getting it. But I try to look at it from the doctor's perspective. And I can appreciate the reluctance of some doctors if they're not properly informed about what it is they would be prescribing. And so tonight, I'm extremely happy to be here with the fine speakers that we have who will talk about how to do just that and to understand it very clearly, and so that we could finally have access to that oil. I thank you for being here tonight, and I hope that you take notes, even if you don't understand everything that's being said by the doctors, and ask questions. Because in asking questions, we'll understand what it is that we need to, so that we can take personal responsibility for our health, even if we don't think it's our responsibility. It is no one else's responsibility. I wish that someone could have gotten my attention and told me the things that I would have need to have known before my wife's diagnosis. Because truly we were stuck for months. And one day I picked myself up off the floor and decided we need to move forward and do something. And by being here tonight, we're taking that great step to learn. With that, I say thank you.